The flash of a paparazzi camera is a brutal sound. For most, it's a fleeting annoyance. But on the night of the Wainwright Industries' annual charity gala, for one woman sitting alone in a quiet, lamplit home, each flash, seen through the cold glare of a tablet screen, was a gunshot to the heart. She watched her husband, the man whose child she carried, beaming on the red carpet. But the woman clinging to his arm, draped in diamonds and a crimson dress, was not her. This is not a story about heartbreak. It's a story about what happens when a quiet, underestimated woman decides the world has mistaken her kindness for weakness, and that the bill for her husband's betrayal has just come due, in the amount of several $billion. The Lowell Wainwright residence in Greenwich, Connecticut, was a masterpiece of understated elegance. It was a house that whispered wealth rather than screamed it. Old money or so, anyone would assume. For Audrina Lowell, it was simply home. At 7 months pregnant, her world had become a tranquil cocoon of prenatal yoga nursery preparations, and ensuring her husband, Preston Wainwright, had his suits perfectly pressed and his favorite single malt, a 21-year-old Glenfiddich, waiting for him after a grueling day at the office. Preston was the CEO of Wainwright Industries, a third-generation manufacturing empire he had aggressively modernized. He was handsome, charismatic, and possessed a restless ambition that Audrina had once found intoxicating. Now it often felt like a current pulling him further and further from shore, leaving her behind. "You're sure you don't mind staying home, darling?" he asked, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke Brioni tuxedo. He smelled of expensive cologne and opportunity. It's going to be a madhouse. Flashing lights, everyone wanting a piece of me. You need to rest. For the baby. Audrina ran a hand over her swollen belly, a soft smile on her face. Of course not, Preston. You go and be brilliant. This is your night. We'll be right here waiting for you. The we was a comforting weight inside her. He kissed her forehead, a perfunctory gesture that barely registered. That's my girl. I'll have the driver pick me up. Don't wait up. He was gone in a cloud of ambition and Tom Ford's Oud Wood. Audrina settled onto the plush sofa, the silence of the large house pressing in on her. She'd wanted to go. She had a beautiful custom-made maternity gown from Oscar de la Renta hanging in her closet, a deep sapphire silk that made her feel like a queen. But Preston had been insistent. Over the last few months, his excuses had become more frequent. She was too tired. The events were too loud. The people were too grasping. It was always for her own good. For the baby's good. She pulled up the live feed of the gala on her tablet, a small act of defiance. She wanted to see his big speech, to see him accept the Philanthropist of the Year award. The red carpet coverage was nauseatingly effusive. The host of Entertainment Tonight. Kevin Frazier was gushing about the titans of industry, and here he is now, the man of the hour, CEO Preston Wainwright. The announcer boomed. Audrina leaned closer, her heart swelling with a familiar pride. The camera panned to Preston as he stepped out of his Maybach. He looked every inch the corporate king. But he wasn't alone. He turned and offered his hand to someone still inside the car. A slender, manicured hand, adorned with a gaudy diamond bracelet, took his. Then she emerged, a woman Audrina vaguely recognized from the company's marketing department, Tiffany LaSalle. She was poured into a crimson dress that was more paint than fabric, her blonde hair a blinding beacon under the lights. She clung to Preston's arm, not as a colleague, but as a trophy. The world tilted on its axis. Audrina's breath hitched. "And who is this stunning vision?" Preston Kevin Frazier asked his microphone, practically in Preston's face. Preston laughed, a smooth, practiced sound that suddenly made Audrina's skin crawl. "This is Tiffany LaSalle, our brilliant head of global branding. She's the secret to our success." He squeezed Tiffany's hand, his gaze lingering on her for a fraction too long. Tiffany preened. "Oh, Preston, you give me too much credit. I just help polish the diamond." The innuendo was as subtle as a sledgehammer. Audrina's tablet felt slick in her suddenly sweaty palms. She watched, paralyzed, as they posed for the cameras. Preston's hand was resting on the small of Tiffany's back, his thumb drawing slow proprietary circles. It was an intimate gesture she knew all too well. Her phone buzzed. A text from her friend Bethany, who worked in finance and kept an eye on the society pages. "Audrina, are you seeing this? Tell me that's his cousin." Another buzz. A link to a notorious gossip blog, The Gilded Dirt. The headline was already up: Wainwright's new asset, CEO debuts platinum blonde, as wife Audrina Lowell mysteriously absent. The article was vicious. It painted Audrina as a reclusive, frumpy socialite, and Tiffany as the vibrant, savvy woman behind the throne. They called them a power couple. The word wife was a phantom limb, an ache where something used to be. Each photograph, each shared glance between Preston and Tiffany was another twist of the knife. He wasn't just having an affair. He was erasing her. He had taken her place, their life, and put another woman in it, parading her on the grandest stage of their professional lives, while his pregnant wife sat at home, told to rest. The pride she had felt moments before curdled into something cold and heavy in the pit of her stomach. The baby kicked a sharp, insistent reminder of the life intertwined with the man who was currently dismantling hers live on television. Tears welled hot and bitter, but she choked them back. The sadness was a raging inferno, but beneath it, something else was beginning to stir. An ember of fury long dormant was starting to glow. He thought she was fragile, delicate, a beautiful piece of art to be kept in his gilded cage. He had forgotten who she was. He had forgotten her name. Not Wainwright, but Lowell. And a Lowell, she had been taught from birth, never ever breaks. They buy the company that tried. The tears lasted for precisely 7 minutes. 1 minute for each month of her pregnancy. For each month she had carried the child of a liar. When the last tear fell, it was as if a switch had been flipped. The grief, raw and gaping, was cauterized by a sudden, chilling clarity. Preston hadn't just broken her heart. He had insulted her intelligence. He had deemed her unworthy of even a discreet betrayal. She walked calmly from the living room, her steps measured and deliberate into the study Preston rarely used. It was her sanctuary, lined with first-edition novels and quiet family portraits. She ignored the photos. She sat behind the antique mahogany desk and picked up a dedicated satellite phone from a locked drawer, a device that hadn't been touched in nearly 5 years. She dialed a number in Switzerland from memory. It rang once. Yes. The voice on the other end was clipped, precise, and instantly familiar. It was the voice of absolute loyalty. Gideon Audrina said, her own voice startlingly steady. "It's me." There was a pause, a millisecond of surprise before the professionalism kicked in. "Audrina, is everything all right?" Gideon Shaw was more than the family lawyer. He was the custodian of a legacy, a man whose loyalty was not to money, but to the memory of the man who had hired him decades ago. "No," she replied the single word, carrying the weight of her shattered world. "But it will be. It's time. Execute protocol Regency." Another pause, this one filled with grim understanding. Protocol Regency was a contingency plan with the subtlety of a nuclear option. It was designed for a moment just like this. "Understood. The jet will be on the tarmac in Teterboro in 90 minutes. Your documents are prepared." "What about the situation?" Audrina glanced at the tablet where Preston was now on stage, accepting his award with Tiffany beaming at him from the front row. The situation has declared war. He just doesn't know I have the superior arsenal. I'll see you in Geneva, Gideon said. The line went dead. 90 minutes later, carrying only a single carry-on bag and the weight of her new reality, Audrina Lowell Wainwright walked out of her home. She didn't look back. The Gulfstream G650 was waiting its engines a low hum in the cool night air. The flight crew greeted her with a quiet, "Welcome back," Miss Lowell pointedly omitting the Wainwright. The transition had already begun. As the jet climbed into the stratosphere, leaving the glittering lights of New York behind, Audrina finally allowed the carefully constructed facade of the last 5 years to crumble away. She was not just Audrina Lowell, the quiet art history major wife of a rising CEO. She was the sole heir of Arthur Kensington, her grandfather known only in the most elite financial circles as the Oracle of Zurich had been a phantom. He built one of the world's largest and most secretive private equity firms, Kensington Global Holdings, from nothing. He believed in stealth wealth. He abhorred the ostentatious displays of the nouveau riche. He moved markets with a single phone call and owned controlling stakes in companies that didn't even know he was on their shareholder registry. When Audrina's parents died in a sailing accident when she was 12, Arthur had raised her. He didn't teach her about society parties. He taught her about hostile takeovers. He didn't read her fairy tales. He read her stock tickers and corporate filings. Her inheritance upon his death 5 years ago came with a unique and binding condition. She was to live for 5 years under a different identity, with only a modest trust fund at her disposal. She had to prove she could build a life and understand people without the shield of immense wealth. "You can't rule a kingdom if you've never walked among the people," he had told her. She had met Preston during this period. He was charming-driven and saw her as a beautiful, intelligent, but ultimately normal woman. She fell in love with the man she thought he was, and with the simple life he offered. She had honored her grandfather's wish. The 5-year term had expired 3 months ago. She had been so caught up in her pregnancy, so content in her bubble, that she hadn't yet reached out to Gideon to officially take the reins. Preston's grand betrayal was in a dark and twisted way a gift. It was the clarion call she needed to wake up. Landing in Geneva, she was escorted not through the main terminal, but to a private exit where a black Bentley was waiting. Gideon Shaw stood beside it, a tall, imposing man in a perfectly tailored suit. His expression a mixture of concern and steely resolve. "Audrina," he said, his voice softer now. "I am so sorry for the circumstances that bring you here." "Don't be Gideon," she said, stepping into the car. "You're about to have a lot more work to do." They drove not to a hotel but to a discreet grey building overlooking the lake. It was the headquarters of Kensington Global Holdings. Inside it was less an office and more a state-of-the-art command center. A small elite team of analysts and lawyers, all of whom had signed ironclad non-disclosure agreements, rose as she entered. They had been waiting for their queen. In a glass-walled conference room, Gideon laid out a series of portfolios on a large digital table. They swirled to life with a touch revealing nested corporate structures, offshore accounts, real estate holdings, and stock portfolios that spanned the globe. The net worth displayed in the corner was a staggering figure, a number with so many commas it looked like a telephone number. "Welcome home," Audrina, Gideon said gently. "Your grandfather's empire awaits your command." Audrina stared at the glowing screen. For 5 years she had been playing a part. Now the play was over. She was no longer just a wronged wife. She was a global economic force. "Gideon," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion, but resolve. Get the M&A team online. I want a complete deep dive analysis of Wainwright Industries. I want to know every creditor, every shareholder, every contract, every vulnerability. I want to know where Preston is over-leveraged and where he's exposed. A grim smile touched Gideon's lips. Already underway. The preliminary report will be ready within the hour. Good, Audrina said, placing a hand on her stomach. Her child would not be born into a broken home. It would be born into an empire. And its first lesson would be what happens when someone underestimates its mother. Preston wanted to be a king. It's time to remind him that I'm the one who owns the chessboard. The deep dive analysis of Wainwright Industries when it arrived was more illuminating than Audrina could have ever hoped. Presented on a secure encrypted network by Kensington Global's top analyst, a ruthless German prodigy named Klaus Richter, the report painted a picture of a company that was a house of cards. Outwardly it's strong, Klaus explained, via a holographic conference call, his image shimmering in the center of the Geneva boardroom. Revenue is up 12% year over year. But it's a facade built on debt. Preston Wainwright has been extremely aggressive. He's leveraged the company to the hilt to fund expansion and, more importantly, to finance this. He swiped his hand, and the Wainwright logo was replaced by another Devereux core. Ronan Devereux's company, Gideon murmured, leaning forward. A major player in advanced robotics and automation. A merger would make Wainwright an industry leader overnight. Precisely, Klaus confirmed. It's Preston's legacy project. The deal is in its final due diligence stage. He's secured a massive syndicated loan from a consortium of banks led by J.P. Morgan to finance the acquisition. But to get those terms, he's used nearly all of the company's unencumbered assets as collateral, and most critically, there are covenants in the loan agreement tied to the company's stock price and debt-to-equity ratio. If the stock drops below a certain threshold, or the ratio gets out of whack, the banks can call the loan. The whole deal collapses. Audrina saw it instantly. The entire grand strategy, Preston's coronation as an industry titan, was balanced on a knife's edge. He's arrogant, Audrina stated more to herself than to the room. He believes his own hype. He thinks the stock is untouchable because the merger news has inflated it. That is his critical error, Klaus said, a flicker of professional admiration in his eyes. He sees only the upside. He has not protected his flank. The plan began to form in Audrina's mind, cold and precise, like one of her grandfather's legendary strategies. It wouldn't be a frontal assault. That was too crude, too obvious. This would be death by 1,000 cuts, a campaign of corporate sabotage, so subtle, so surgical, that Preston wouldn't know who was attacking him until it was far too late. Gideon Audrina commanded, her voice ringing with newfound authority. I'm creating a new holding company, a shell corporation. Let's call it Phoenix Ascendant Capital. Gideon's pen was already moving. Domiciled where the Cayman Islands, completely anonymous. Phoenix Ascendant will be the public face. Behind it, a labyrinth of other entities, all leading back to a blind trust here in Switzerland. And Phoenix Ascendant's mission, Klaus asked, intrigued. Its mission is to become Preston Wainwright's biggest nightmare, Audrina replied. Klaus, I want you to start buying Wainwright Industries corporate bonds on the secondary market. Use 12 different brokers. I want it quiet. We start with the smaller tranches, the ones no one pays attention to. Then we move to the bigger institutional debt. I want to become his single largest creditor without him ever knowing my name. Next, she turned her attention to the stock. We can't just short it. That's too visible and could trigger an investigation. I want a more elegant solution. Klaus identified the key institutional shareholders, the pension funds, the mutual funds. I want to know who their fund managers are, what their pressure points are. We will use Kensington's influence to start whispering in their ears. We'll leak anonymous, expertly crafted analyst reports highlighting Wainwright's debt exposure, questioning the synergy of the Devereux merger. We will create doubt. We will sow fear. The strategy was twofold. First, by buying the debt, she was gathering the ammunition. As the primary creditor, she would eventually hold immense power over the company. Second, by subtly manipulating the stock price downwards, she would trigger the loan covenants. When the banks got nervous, the entire Devereux deal would be in jeopardy. Over the next 3 weeks, Geneva became Audrina's war room. Gone was the soft, accommodating wife. In her place was a shrewd, decisive leader who seemed born for the role. She worked 18-hour days, fueled by a potent cocktail of anger, adrenaline, and a deep protective love for her unborn child. She devoured financial reports, grilled analysts, and mapped out corporate structures with a clarity that amazed even Gideon. She was her grandfather's granddaughter. Phoenix Ascendant Capital moved like a ghost in the financial markets. Millions of dollars of Wainwright debt flowed quietly into its possession. In New York, London, and Tokyo, influential fund managers started receiving unsolicited bearish reports on Wainwright Industries from a mysterious new research firm. The reports were masterpieces of plausible deniability, filled with hard data, but framed in the most negative possible light. The financial news outlets began to pick up on the chatter. A small article appeared in the Wall Street Journal's Heard on the Street column, questioning the high valuation of the Devereux deal. Wainwright's stock, which had been on a steady climb, began to wobble. It dropped a point, then two. Nothing catastrophic, but the relentless upward momentum had been broken. Meanwhile, Audrina deployed another team. This one focused on Wainwright's operational side. Using Kensington's vast network, they identified a key supplier of rare earth minerals essential for Wainwright's new product line. Kensington Global quietly acquired a majority stake in that supplier. Days later, citing unforeseen logistical challenges, the supplier cancelled its long-term contract with Wainwright Industries, sending their production schedule into chaos. Preston Wainwright, basking in the afterglow of his gala appearance and his flourishing affair with Tiffany, was completely oblivious. He was building his legacy brick by gilded brick, unaware that the very foundations were being systematically dissolved beneath him by a force he couldn't see a ghost in his own machine. A ghost he thought was at home resting. For Preston Wainwright, life had never been better. The gala had been a resounding triumph. He and Tiffany were the new darlings of the business pages, their picture splashed across Forbes and Fortune. Tiffany was intoxicating, ambitious, and utterly enthralled by his power, which was exactly how Preston liked it. She was a reflection of his own success. He'd called Audrina a few times. The first call went to voicemail. "Hey honey, just checking in. Hope you're feeling rested. Things are crazy here. The deal is moving forward. This is going to set us up for life, for the baby's life. Talk soon." The second call a few days later also went unanswered. "Audrina, it's me again. Are you getting these? I know you probably need your space, but you could at least text back. I'm worried." The concern in his voice was a thin veneer over a growing annoyance. Her silence was inconvenient. By the third week, his messages had a sharper edge. "All right, Audrina, this is getting ridiculous. Whatever silent treatment you're giving me, it's childish. I'm closing the biggest deal of my life, and I expect my wife to be supportive. Call me back." He dismissed her absence as a prolonged hormonal sulk. He'd deal with it later. Once the Devereux deal was signed, he'd be so powerful, so wealthy, she'd come around. He'd buy her a new Bentley or a diamond necklace. That always worked. His first inkling that something was wrong came not from his home life, but from his CFO, a perpetually nervous man named George Findlay. "Preston, our stock dipped another 3% today," George said, hovering by the door of Preston's expansive office. Preston waved a dismissive hand, not looking up from a proposal Tiffany had brought him. "It's market jitters, George. Profit-taking before the merger announcement. It'll bounce back. It's not just that George persisted, wringing his hands. There's some negative chatter from the analyst community. A new firm, Phoenix Ascendant, has been putting out some very pointed research about our debt load." "Never heard of them." Preston grunted. "They're nobodies trying to make a name for themselves by taking a shot at the king. Ignore them." A week later, George was back, his face paler than before. "Preston, we have a problem. A major problem. Global Minerals LLC just terminated our supply contract for neodymium, effective immediately." This time, Preston looked up. "What, they can't do that? We have a 5-year exclusive agreement. They're invoking a force majeure clause, citing a corporate restructuring," George stammered. "Our legal team says it's flimsy, but it will tie us up in court for months. Our entire next-gen production line is dependent on that supply. We'll have to find a new source, and the spot market prices are triple what we were paying." Preston slammed his fist on the desk. "Find out who owns them. I'll buy the damn company and fire their board myself." George flinched. "That's the other thing. They were acquired last week. The ownership is shielded by a series of shell corporations based in the Caymans. We can't find the ultimate beneficiary." The stock dropped another 5% on the news of the supply chain disruption. Now it was flirting dangerously with the threshold stipulated in the J.P. Morgan loan covenant. The whispers in the financial district grew louder. Was Wainwright Industries overextended? Was the Devereaux deal too rich? The final blow came during a conference call with the banking consortium. The lead banker from J.P. Morgan, a man named Robert Miller, who had previously been Preston's biggest cheerleader, sounded decidedly cool. Preston Robert began his voice, lacking its usual warmth. "We're growing concerned about the volatility. The stock slide, the supply chain issues. It's making our underwriters nervous. And we've noticed something else. A significant portion of your publicly traded corporate debt has been bought up in recent weeks. It's all been consolidated under one entity." A cold dread began to creep up Preston's spine. "Who a private fund," Robert said. "Phoenix Ascendant Capital." The name hit Preston like a physical blow. The obscure research firm. He had dismissed them as gnats. But they weren't just buzzing. They were biting. They had been quietly buying up his company's debt, becoming one of his most powerful creditors, while simultaneously sabotaging his stock price. This wasn't random market fluctuation. This was a coordinated, sophisticated attack. Furthermore, Robert continued his voice now. Like chips of ice, Ronan Devereaux's people have been in touch. Given the current instability, they are requesting an emergency meeting to seek reassurances. They've hinted they may need to reevaluate the terms of the merger or even walk away. The meeting is set for tomorrow morning, at your headquarters. The call ended. Preston sat in stunned silence, the panoramic view of the city from his corner office suddenly feeling like a prison. He was being hunted. An unknown enemy was dismantling his empire from the shadows piece by piece. His legacy project, the Devereaux merger, was on the brink of collapse. His company was bleeding. He felt a surge of panic, a desperate need for an anchor. He picked up his phone and dialed Audrina again. It went straight to voicemail. "Audrina." "Pick up the phone," he said, his voice ragged with a fear he hadn't felt in years. I think I'm in trouble." For the first time, he wasn't annoyed by her silence. He was terrified by it. It felt connected somehow. The timing was too perfect. The quiet wife, the silent phone, the invisible enemy. A paranoid thought, insane and impossible, flickered in his mind before he crushed it. It couldn't be. She didn't have it in her, but as he stared out at his kingdom for the first time in his life, Preston Wainwright felt truly, utterly alone. The whispers were no longer just on Wall Street. They were inside his own head. The Wainwright Industries boardroom was a theater of power. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the grim faces of the board members, a collection of old money scions and corporate lifers who had grown fat and complacent under Preston's aggressive leadership. Today, their complacency had curdled into fear. At the head of the table, Preston looked haggard, the strain of the last 48 hours etched onto his face. Across from him sat Ronan Devereux and his team, their expressions unreadable, their silence a weapon. "My friends, members of the board," Preston began his voice, attempting a confidence he did not feel. "Let me be clear. The recent market volatility and supply chain hiccup are temporary setbacks. Our fundamentals are strong. The strategic value of the merger with Devereux Core is undeniable. The value is not in question, Preston Ronan." Devereux cut in his voice, smooth and dangerous. "Your ability to finance it is. Our deal is contingent on a stable Wainwright Industries. Right now, you look anything but stable. Your largest creditor is a ghost and your stock is in freefall." The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Their personal fortunes were tied to this deal. Just as Preston was about to offer another empty platitude, the grand double doors at the end of the boardroom swung open. Every head turned. Framed in the doorway stood Audrina. But it was not the Audrina they knew. Gone was the gentle, soft-spoken wife. This woman was an avenging angel, sculpted from ice and steel. She was dressed in a custom Tom Ford pantsuit, its sharp lines accentuating, rather than hiding her pregnancy. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon. Her face was serene, but her eyes held a fire that could melt glaciers. Flanking her were two men. One was Gideon Shaw, whose reputation as one of the world's most formidable corporate lawyers preceded him. The other was Klaus Richter, the architect of Preston's misery. A collective gasp went through the room. Preston stared his face, a mask of utter disbelief. "Audrina, what in God's name are you doing here? This is a private meeting." Audrina ignored him. Her gaze swept across the stunned faces of the board, lingering for a moment on Ronan Devereux, before finally settling on her husband. She didn't walk. She glided into the room, her presence commanding absolute silence. "You're mistaken, Preston," she said, her voice calm and clear, echoing in the cavernous space. "It's not a private meeting. It's my meeting." She stopped at the opposite end of the table, placing her hands flat on the polished wood. "Gentlemen, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Audrina Lowell, and as of 8:00 a.m. this morning, Geneva time, I am the new majority shareholder of Wainwright Industries." A bomb going off would have been quieter. The room erupted in a cacophony of confused, angry shouts. "What is the meaning of this?" one board member sputtered. "This is absurd," another yelled. Preston shot to his feet, his face turning a blotchy red. "This is insane. You're my wife. You don't have two pennies to rub together. Security, get her out of here." Gideon Shaw stepped forward, placing a sleek leather portfolio on the table. He tapped it once. "I advise you to sit down, Mr. Wainwright." Gideon said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Everything my client has stated is legally and financially verifiable. Over the past month, the controlling interest in Wainwright Industries, along with 68% of its publicly traded corporate debt, has been acquired by Phoenix Ascendant Capital." He paused for effect. "And as the sole owner and chairman of Phoenix Ascendant Miss, Lowell now controls this company. The blood drained from Preston's face. He sank back into his chair as if his legs had been cut out from under him. He stared at Audrina, at the woman he thought he knew, the woman he had dismissed and betrayed. He was seeing a stranger, a terrifying, powerful stranger. Audrina's eyes locked with his. There was no hatred in them. There was something far worse, indifference. You built this company on a foundation of reckless debt and hollow promises, Preston, she said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. You leveraged its future for your own vanity. That ends today. The deal with Devereaux Corps is officially on hold, pending a full audit and a strategic review under my leadership. She then turned her attention to Ronan Devereaux, who was watching the entire exchange with a look of shrewd fascination. Mr. Devereaux, Audrina said, a hint of professional courtesy in her voice. I believe a partnership between our companies could indeed be fruitful, but it will be a partnership of equals, built on strength and transparency, not on the precarious finances of a desperate man. My team will be in touch to discuss new terms. Ronan Devereaux gave a slow, deliberate nod, a small smile playing on his lips. He respected power, and he was witnessing a masterclass in it. Finally, Audrina looked back at the board of directors. As my first act as majority shareholder, I am calling for a vote of no confidence in the current CEO. She raised a single elegant eyebrow. All those in favor. One by one, like dominoes falling, the hands of the board members went up. They were rats deserting a sinking ship, scrambling to curry favor with the new power. Audrina's gaze returned to Preston. He sat motionless, a broken man at the head of a table he no longer commanded. His kingdom had been conquered, his crown seized, and the woman who had just dethroned him was the same one he had told to stay home and rest. You are dismissed, Preston. Audrina said the words as final as a death sentence. The meeting is adjourned. The board members scurried out of the room, avoiding Preston's gaze as if he were radioactive. Soon only a handful of people remained, Preston still slumped in his chair, Audrina standing resolute and untouchable, Gideon and Klaus her loyal sentinels, and unexpectedly, Tiffany LaSalle, who had burst in after hearing the commotion, her face a confused mess of peroxide and panic. Preston, what's going on? She demanded, rushing to his side. Who are these people? Why is she here? Preston didn't even look at her. His entire universe was focused on the woman who was now methodically arranging documents at the head of the table. Get out, Tiffany, Audrina said without looking up. Excuse me, Tiffany scoffed, placing her hands on her hips. You can't talk to me like that. Preston. Audrina finally lifted her head, and the cold authority in her eyes made Tiffany take an involuntary step back. This is no longer your concern. Your employment at Wainwright Industries is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Your personal effects will be couriered to you. You can't do that, Preston. Tiffany shrieked, tugging on his arm. It was then that Klaus Richter stepped forward, holding a tablet. Actually, Ms. LaSalle, we can. He swiped the screen to show a series of emails and encrypted text messages. We have conclusive evidence that for the past 6 months, you have been passing proprietary information about the Devereaux deal negotiations to a competitor, Vanguard Consolidated. It appears your brilliance in branding was matched only by your talent for corporate espionage. I believe they paid you quite handsomely. Tiffany's face went white. Preston's head snapped up, a new wave of betrayal washing over his features. He looked at Tiffany, truly looked at her, and saw not a partner, but a parasite. The affair, the flattery, the public appearances, it was all a transaction. He had been a mark. Get her out of here, Preston rasped, his voice hollow. As security guards materialized and gently but firmly led a protesting Tiffany from the room, Preston finally found the strength to stand. He approached Audrina, his hands raised in a gesture of supplication. "Audrina, please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Why I don't understand. You don't need to understand the how, Preston. You only need to understand the why," she said, her voice softening fractionally, not with pity, but with a distant memory of the man she thought she had married. "You stood on a red carpet and introduced another woman to the world as the secret to your success, while I was at home carrying your child. You didn't just disrespect me. You tried to render me invisible. You made a calculation that I was worthless." "No, that's not true. I love you," he pleaded, reaching for her hand. She pulled it away. "Love, you don't know the meaning of the word. Love is not about convenience. It's not about who looks best on your arm at a party. You love the idea of me, the quiet, supportive wife who made your life easy. You never once bothered to see the real me." "We can fix this," he said, desperation making him frantic. "I'll end it with her. I just did. We have a baby coming. Our family. We can save our family." "There is no we anymore," Audrina stated, the finality in her tone, like the closing of a vault door. "You will have liberal visitation rights with your child, conditioned on your good behavior. Financially, you will be provided for, but your time of opulence is over." Gideon stepped forward and slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a severance agreement. "As the outgoing CEO, you are entitled to this package," Gideon explained blandly. "It consists of 1 year's base salary, no bonus and no stock options. You will vacate the Greenwich residence within 30 days. It is and always has been a Lowell family property." Preston looked at the figure on the paper. It was a pittance and insult, less than his bonus from the previous year. It was enough to live on, but not enough to maintain the life he had built. He would be a nobody. This is revenge," he spat, the desperation turning to bitter anger. "You're destroying me out of spite." Audrina finally allowed a flicker of emotion to cross her face, a deep, profound sadness. "This isn't revenge, Preston. This is an accounting. You made your choices. You placed your bets. You simply bet on the wrong woman. You thought you were a king, but you built your castle in my backyard, and you forgot that I own the land." She turned to leave her business there, concluded. "I'm the father of your child, Audrina," he yelled after her, his last pathetic attempt to find a foothold. She paused at the door, her back to him. "Yes, you are," she said quietly. "And for his sake, I truly hope you learn to be a better man. But you will not be my husband, and you will never again be my equal." And with that, she walked out of the boardroom and out of his life, leaving him alone with the ruins of the empire he had built, and the ghost of the woman he had never known. 6 months later, the view from the top floor of the newly christened Kensington Wainwright Tower was breathtaking. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the city, a city that now moved to a rhythm Audrina Lowell helped conduct. The old dark mahogany of Preston's office had been replaced with clean lines, glass and light. In a state-of-the-art bassinet beside her desk, her son Arthur Lowell gurgled softly in his sleep. He had his mother's eyes. Audrina had been a whirlwind of change. She hadn't dismantled Wainwright Industries. She had surgically rebuilt it. She exposed the rot, fired the sycophantic executives Preston had installed, and promoted a culture of innovation and integrity. The deal with Devereux Corps had been successfully renegotiated. It was now a true merger of equals, creating a technological powerhouse poised to dominate the market for the next decade. Ronan Devereux had become a respected colleague and a trusted ally. She didn't run the company with the frantic, ego-driven ambition of Preston. She led with the quiet, unshakable confidence of her grandfather. She was decisive, brilliant, and surprisingly compassionate, earning the fierce loyalty of her employees. She was not just a billionaire who had inherited a fortune. She was a leader who was building a legacy. Kensington Global Holdings, once a shadowy entity, had a new public face. Audrina had established the Lowell Foundation, a massive philanthropic endeavor dedicated to funding education for underprivileged women and providing venture capital for female-led startups. She wasn't just playing the game, she was changing the rules. As for Preston, his fall had been as swift as it was brutal. Stripped of his title, his fortune, and his social standing, he became a pariah. The business world that had once celebrated him now mocked him as the fool who had lost an empire because he couldn't keep his zipper up. The last Audrina had heard through a report from Gideon was that he was working a mid-level consulting job for a firm in Stamford, living in a rented condo. He saw his son every other weekend. The meetings were cordial, sterile, and supervised. He was a ghost in the life of the child whose future he had almost gambled away. A soft chime from her computer brought her back to the present. It was a news alert. Tiffany LaSalle had just been sentenced to 18 months in a low-security federal prison for corporate espionage. A small, sad footnote to the entire affair. Audrina looked away from the screen and down at her sleeping son. She gently stroked his cheek, her touch infinitely soft. Her fight hadn't just been about a company or about money. It had been for him. She wanted him to grow up in a world where his mother's strength was not a hidden secret, but a celebrated fact. She wanted him to know that integrity was the most valuable asset, and that true power wasn't about dominating others, but about having the fortitude to build something better, something that would last. Her grandfather, the Oracle of Zurich, had taught her how to acquire power. Preston, in his own foolish way, had taught her why it was necessary to wield it. And her son, in his perfect, innocent sleep, was teaching her what to do with it. A legacy, she thought, looking out at the endless city skyline. Not of revenge, but of resilience. A legacy worthy of the name Lowell and worthy of a mother's love. 4 years later, the world knew Audrina Lowell as a titan. Her face graced the cover of Time magazine under the headline, "The Architect," celebrating her visionary leadership and transformative philanthropy. The Kensington Wainwright Tower was a symbol of ethical capitalism, a beacon in the often murky world of high finance. To the world, she was an icon of untouchable power and success. To her 4-year-old son, Arthur, she was just Mommy. One evening in the sprawling penthouse that overlooked Central Park, Audrina was on the floor, helping Arthur build an elaborate castle out of magnetic tiles. It was their sacred time, the hours between her last meeting and his bedtime, where the CEO vanished and the mother took her place. "And this is the tallest tower for the Queen," Arthur declared, placing a final triangular piece on top of their creation. "So she can see everything. That's a very smart design. My love," Audrina smiled, her heart swelling. "The Queen has to protect her kingdom." Arthur looked up at her, his expression suddenly serious, his blue eyes a mirror of her own. "Mommy," he asked with the unfiltered curiosity of a child, "does Daddy have a kingdom?" The question, so innocent, struck Audrina with an unexpected force. She had always been prepared for this, had discussed it with Child. Psychologists had rehearsed gentle, age-appropriate answers. But hearing it now in the quiet of their home, it felt different. "Daddy has his own home, sweetheart," she answered carefully. "A different kind of home." "It's small," Arthur stated, not as a judgment, but as an observation. He spent every other Sunday with Preston at his modest two-bedroom apartment in a quiet New Jersey suburb. "We built a Lego car last time. He said he used to have a bigger office than you." Audrina's breath caught in her throat. The past was never as far away as it seemed. "He did," she said softly. "People have different chapters in their lives. Sometimes they have big offices, and sometimes they enjoy building Lego cars more." The conversation lingered with her long after Arthur was asleep. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, the glittering expanse of Manhattan spread before her like a carpet of jewels. She had the kingdom Arthur spoke of. She had protected it, grown it, and reshaped it in her image. But the weight of the crown was a solitary one. She had allies, employees, and a son she adored, but the life she led was one of singular responsibility. She wondered if Preston, in his quiet, smaller life, had found a measure of peace. She had not. The answer, or at least a glimpse of it, came 2 weeks later. It was the annual fall festival at Arthur's elite private school. It was a rare, mandatory parent event, and she knew Preston would be there. She saw him standing near the pumpkin patch, looking distinctly out of place in his simple polo shirt and jeans amidst the designer-clad parents. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a quiet reservation. He had more grey at his temples, and the sharp lines of ambition on his face had softened into something more weary. As she approached with Arthur, a flicker of the old tension passed between them. But Arthur broke it, running ahead. "Daddy!" Preston's face lit up as he knelt to hug his son, and in that unguarded moment, Audrina saw not the ghost of her enemy, but simply a father. "He's gotten so tall," Preston said, his voice quiet as Audrina joined them. "He eats like a teenager already," she replied, the exchange feeling unnervingly normal. They walked together for a few minutes, watching Arthur try to throw rings over a gourd. The silence between them was no longer charged with anger, but filled with the unspoken history of a shared life that now felt like a dream. I saw the article in Time. Preston said, his eyes on their son. "Congratulations. What you've done with the company. It's incredible. Better than I ever could have done." There was no bitterness in his voice, only a tone of resigned honesty. It was the first time he had ever admitted it. "Thank you, Preston," she said, genuinely surprised. I got a promotion." He offered a faint, self-conscious smile on his face. "I'm a senior partner at the firm now. It's good work, meaningful. I'm home by 6 every night." He paused. "I was a terrible husband, Audrina. I know that. I was so blinded by more. I never stopped to see what I had." This was the apology she never knew she needed, offered not in a boardroom as a plea, but in a schoolyard as a quiet confession. "We were both very different people then," she conceded. "The best part of our story is right there," she added, nodding towards Arthur, who had just won a small stuffed bear and was holding it up triumphantly for them to see. A genuine smile touched Preston's lips. "Yeah," he said, his gaze filled with a profound, sorrowful pride. "He is." Later that night, after tucking Arthur into bed, Audrina stood by her window again. The encounter had not unsettled her as she'd feared. Instead, it had brought a sense of closure, of peace. Preston's defeat was no longer the source of her strength. Her strength now came from the empire she commanded, the future she was building, and the little boy sleeping down the hall. She had won the war years ago, but today, in a sun-dappled schoolyard, she finally felt like she had won the peace. The kingdom was secure not because of its wealth or power, but because its queen finally understood that her greatest legacy was not the towering skyscraper that bore her name, but the small hand that would hold hers tomorrow. And so Audrina Lowell didn't just take back her life. She rebuilt the entire world around her on her own terms. This wasn't just a story of revenge. It was a masterclass in empowerment, a testament to the hidden strength within those who are underestimated. It shows that the deepest betrayals can sometimes forge the strongest wills. What would you have done in her shoes? Would you have fought back or walked away? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. This story is a reminder that you never truly know the power someone holds until you push them too far. If you were captivated by Audrina's incredible journey from a wronged wife to a corporate queen, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this story with anyone who needs a reminder of their own inner strength. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable story of justice and ultimate triumph. Thank you for listening.